Start of this season's been pretty backwards. How's it going, everybody? Hope your week is well. I'm Eric and welcome to Out of the Groove. I have a decent amount of things I want to get into, so I'm going to just jump right in. First off, as always, let's talk about California. The Auto Club 400 was this past Sunday. Kyle Larson, who came into the week the hottest driver in NASCAR, finished second place 3 races in a row, won the Xfinity race on Saturday, and won the Cup race on Sunday to get his first win of the season. So as if he wasn't already kind of a shoo-in to make the chase at this point, now he's pretty much locked himself in. I talked on last week's episode about how Kyle Larson has really blossomed into one of the biggest names of the sport, and it only took him about 3 years. And I mentioned how that's kind of been a trend we've seen with guys like Joey Logano in the past, and we could see it with Chase Elliott or Eric Jones or even Daniel Suarez here in the coming years. It seems like Kyle Larson had out of nowhere, honestly, it's kind of out of nowhere. We knew Larson had talent, we knew that team was decent, but this is out of nowhere. Nobody thought Larson was going to come into this year and dominate the way he has. Even at the end of last season when he started to run better, he was still like maybe a 10th place average, that's where you kind of expect him to finish most days. This season though, he's been probably the best car every race. He's led laps in every race. He should have won at least 2 or 3 of these races. But that's the way NASCAR is, can't win them all. A lot of times one little thing can go wrong and derail your whole day, but he's managed to keep the trouble to a minimum. Finished second, like I said, 3 times already this season, and of course win here at Auto Club. That's an average finish of like 1.6 in his last 4 races. I don't know if my math's exactly right, something like that, but it was ridiculous. I gushed about Larson last week, gonna move on from that today. I'm sure you'll hear enough about Larson from the rest of the media. As I mentioned at the beginning, Sunday was kind of backwards. As I mentioned at the very beginning, Sunday kind of went a little backwards. A lot of heavy favorites like Kevin Harvick, Brad Keselowski, Jimmy Johnson had issues early, and by early I mean like within the first few laps. Harvick and Keselowski were able to cover okay. In fact, Keselowski ended up finishing second with a pretty damaged race car. Harvick and him both sustained damage on the initial start of the race. Harvick actually managed to work his way back and finish 13th, which isn't too bad. Jimmy Johnson had a small issue in that wreck with Keselowski on lap 4. He had a pit road issue later on. He finished 21st, and that just brings up an interesting point at the beginning of this season. Coming to this year, I think a lot of people had guys like Brad Keselowski, Kevin Harvick, and Jimmy Johnson as arguably the 3 favorites coming into the season. And at least in Harvick and Keselowski's case, they have shown speed at certain times, but Harvick has been more consistent. He had his issue at Atlanta that cost him a victory there. Jimmy Johnson has shown no speed. Really, that entire Hendrick team, with the exception of Chase Elliott and Casey Kane in a couple instances, have shown very little speed. I've already mentioned a little bit of how it seems like the Joe Gibbs cars have kind of fallen back into the pack a little bit more. Most notably of them, Matt Kenseth has just not caught a break this season. And so to sum things up, we've just seen several well-known NASCAR veterans, champions, really not get off to a very good start this year. I mean, if I just look at the points right now, I know he won the Daytona 500, obviously, but Kurt Busch is 14th in points, which is a little lower than I think he'd like to be. You have guys like Jimmy Johnson, 17th in points. Definitely not where he expects to be. Dale Earnhardt Jr. is 21st, and that team's just not shown any speed. And I don't know how much of it's Junior. I know he's coming back from injury, but it just seems like that car has not been there. And arguably the biggest surprise is Matt Kenseth in 25th in points right now. All these guys I just named, Johnson obviously a 7-time champion, won the championship last year. Dale Earnhardt Jr. was one of the strongest cars last year before he went out due to injury. Matt Kenseth came within 1 restart of making it to the Final 4. And yet all these veterans, champions in a couple of these cases, just not been there. And now in most of their cases, their cars just haven't been that good. Even Matt Kenseth, who is 25th in points, that's mostly due to 3 DNFs already this season. DNFs that in at least a couple of their cases weren't so much his fault, but just in general, his cars have not looked very fast at all. He has a 3rd place finish, and I think he has a 9th place finish, but even in those races, he seemed to have like a 12th or 15th place car for most of the afternoon. And the same goes for Jimmy Johnson and Dale Jr., sometimes even worse. Jr. we've seen running like 20th a lot of these races. There are several big name drivers that we've yet to see really show any dominance so far this season. Like Kenseth, Johnson, Jr., Denny Hamlin's another one. But it's an interesting shakeup because while we have seen these veterans struggle or have their own set of issues, we've seen several younger or lesser known drivers really step up this year. I mean, just these first few races, we've seen Kyle Larson, like I said, dominate. A guy who kind of just came out of nowhere. We knew he was decent, but we didn't expect him to suddenly make this turn it on like this. Ryan Blaney, who showed flashes last year, he's been better this season. Jamie McMurray is another one. Chase Elliott, like I said, has been running top 5 pretty much every race so far this year. Ryan Newman's run around the top 10 for much of this year and stole that win at Phoenix, so how about that? And so yeah, even though I know we're only 5 races into the season, but that's still 5 races at some pretty different racetracks. I mean, we're going to our first short track this weekend, so that might cause some new names to pop back up at the top. But I think we've got a decent sample size now. We can kind of get an idea of who really needs to work on their stuff or who's really got it rolling right now. Now, there are a couple drivers that have been pretty stably at the top. Martin Truex Jr. continues to be one of the best cars. It seems like him and Kyle Larson have basically established themselves as the 2 cars to beat on a week-to-week basis so far. Keselowski's had speed. Harvick's had speed at some cases, but even he's been kind of inconsistent so far. Logano as well. I'll be interested to see if guys like Jamie McMurray, who's currently 6th in points, can hold that spot or at least stay near there, or Clint Boyer, who's 9th in points at the moment. I know he's new in that 14. He's rejuvenated, found new life in that 14 car. If he can continue to stay in the top 10 and compete for wins like he did at Auto Club. There's really not much to talk about the race. I mean, it was dominated primarily by Truex and Larson. They both won a stage each. It came down to pit road strategy. Truex stayed out. Larson took some tires. Couple of late restarts later, Larson was the only one able to drive away. Truex held on for 4th place finish to move him up to 3rd in points, or keep him in 3rd in points. I don't remember where he was before that, so still got a good car, still in good position. Truex already has a win this year. Larson's already got a win. Both of them, they're set. A couple other notable high finishers. Daniel Suarez, for the 2nd week in a row, got a top 10 finish, finished 7th. Clint Boyer, like I mentioned, finished 3rd, which broke a year and a half, 2-year streak or something of no top 5s. He's got one finally. Eric Jones ran top 5, top 10 almost all day. He ended up finishing 12th due to the pit road strategy at the end. He's still my leader in Rookie of the Year votes right now. But I gotta hand it to Daniel Suarez. That team feels like they start every week terrible. They're running 20th place. Oftentimes they're a lap down or fighting to stay on the lead lap for the first 75% of the race. And then somehow, at least these last 2 or 3 weeks at the end, all of a sudden, he sneaks into the top 10. Sometimes they actually make his car better. Other times they kind of use some strategy to their advantage like they did this week. But either way, you got to give that team credit. As of right now, Eric Jones is 15th in points. Daniel Suarez is 19th in points. So both of them are still flirting with a chase berth. I think if Eric Jones continues to run as well as they have, they will make the chase. Daniel Suarez is going to have to be a little bit more consistent. He's going to have to start the race better. He can't constantly coming from behind trying to play catch up with everybody. That's not going to work out too well for him. And speaking of the chase, call me crazy, but I don't think it's too early to actually voice some potentially serious concern for a couple of those big names I mentioned earlier. Dale Earnhardt Jr. right now really doesn't look anywhere close to being a chase competitive team, especially now with all these young guns like Jones, Suarez, Austin Dillon, Chase Elliott. Some of these drivers weren't even in chase consideration last year. Larson, too. The fact that they're all looking so good, I feel like there's less spots for some of these veterans to take up that kind of been more open in the past few years. I mean, think about it. The last couple of years, Casey Kane hasn't really been relevant. They're looking pretty decent right now. Last couple of years, there's Eric Jones hasn't been a car. The 77 hasn't been a team. That's a new car that looks like a chase competitive team. So there's 16 spots usually. Some of those spots aren't as open as they have been recently. And I mentioned Junior. Matt Kenseth is another big one. Like I said, he's 25th in points. He's got 3 DNFs. He does have a top 5 and a top 10, so he has shown speed at times. But 3 DNFs, guy can't catch a break. And that seemed to be the story of Kenseth's year last year. Had a lot of strong runs and just wasn't able to capitalize. That's what bit him in the butt at Phoenix at the end of last season. So that team's going to have to figure out how to be more consistent and take advantage of their strong days. And I know it sounds crazy, but I will throw Jimmy Johnson into that mix as well. We're used to Jimmy Johnson starting the season out strong. That's kind of been his typical thing. He starts the year off strong. Maybe there's always that summer stretch where they kind of slack off and then they turn it on in the chase. We're not seeing that usual strength in the beginning of the season. I know it's early, and I know it is Jimmy Johnson, and I think he's 17th in points, so it's not like he's out of it or anything like that. But a couple bad breaks don't go his way, and if he's not able to get a win, because there are a lot of guys like Larson, like Chase Elliott, guys that we're not used to seeing compete for wins, Clint Boyer even, are back up there running up front and making it harder for some of these other established veterans, champions, to get to where they have usually been. Call me crazy, but it has been a pretty topsy-turvy start to the season. Somewhat unexpected for sure. And that's about all I have for this week's show. Martinsville Speedway is this next week, so we've got our first real short track of the schedule. Might see some new faces. JGR dominated short tracks really the last couple of years. They've been the strongest. It'll be interesting to see if that continues to carry on since they haven't shown quite as much strength at the beginning of this season, but it'll be interesting. I'll be curious to see if Larson, a guy who's known for running well at the fast racetracks and really has never made himself that known on these shorter racetracks, if he can come out and continue to back up his points-leading effort. A lot to look forward to. I always love Martinsville races. They're always fun. Should be exciting. Should be a good one. Thank you guys for watching. Check out all my stuff in the links. Patreon, if you're able to contribute there. Twitter, all that stuff. I even have my Snapchat down there now. Whoa, fun. I'm a real social media star. W Cup Series and Out of the Groove hats, t-shirts. Those are also down there, which is kind of fun. All that good stuff. Thank you guys once again for watching. Hope you're with us next Thursday. We'll talk about Martinsville, preview Texas, which is one of my personal favorite racetracks, as you know. Looking forward to the next couple weeks. Also, check out my NASCAR parody that came out just a couple days ago if you haven't seen it already. Got a lot of stuff to hype up, a lot of stuff to plug. But I am now done, so thanks guys for watching. I'll see you next week. Have a good one.